the number of times I talk to CEOs, sales leaders, sales people, and they're just like, okay, we help you deliver efficiency, effectiveness, and ROI. I'm like, okay, I've always wanted effectiveness. I've always wanted ROI, but like, why now?
I had all the things on paper and I was miserable.
What drives me, what motivates me, and more importantly, what do I connect my worth to if it's not those external things?
I hate category creation. To the average person, they're not looking for big and fluffy. They're looking to solve a problem.
And they're like, well, we do everything. We're a Swiss Army knife. I'm like, whoa, if it's going to take you 30 minutes for me, there's no way in hell you can expect, your buyer to be able to actually spend the time to figure it out.
If you're a company that's doing PLG and you don't have an enterprise buying process, you're not PLG, you're direct to consumer.
My pet peeve that I will be with is please don't do your messaging without.
Wow! Wow.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Sheena and Madison Beyond the Valley podcast. Woohoo!
I'm so excited.
I'm Sheena, obviously, and this is Madison, and we are committed to bringing this to you every couple weeks, at least through the year of 2025, because I'm sure our raving fans will demand more, and we got to give the people what they want. But think of this as all things go to market, all things life topical, all things consulting in terms of how we've taken our careers, and just a hodgepodge of, like I said, what's top of mind, what's topical, what we find interesting, and allowing you into some of our private conversations. And again, want to hear what you are working on, what you're thinking about, and of course, continuing the conversation. So Madison, maybe before we get started, giving everybody a little background on your background, who you are, and more importantly, why are you here? Why did we start this? Why are we putting the energy in on a Saturday morning with nannies and sick puppies and coming out of fires to even put this on?
Yes. Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is Madison Leonard. I am a longtime product marketer. I actually started my career in more of the user research side of things and the product side of things. Then I saw what marketing was doing. I was like, that looks really fun. I'm going to go try that. And so I went kind of on this marketing journey, eventually landing in product marketing, both in direct to consumer and B2B. I'm sure we can at a later point go into the details of all that, but that's kind of the high level of my career. On a personal note, I'm a huge dog lover. I train my own dog and other dogs in my free time because I love it so much. And I think in general, you and I, Sheena, we met. We both consult for one company right now. And during that journey, we had these sort of one-off conversations. And we just, I feel really vibed, for lack of a better word.
Vibe. I like
different
that.
topics and picking each other's brain about things and having discussions about topics both in the consulting and go-to-market and product marketing space, as well as outside of that. So health and wellness being a topic as an example. And through those conversations, we just kind of decided, why don't we put ourselves on blast a little bit and let other people into the conversations that we're having, and kind of just deep dive on various things that we may have deep expertise in, as well as debate about topics that maybe we're just interested and curious about, and hopefully engage that sort of discussion with the community as well. So I'm super excited. I'm sure you have more that you probably want to add to what I just said, but I'm curious your perspective on why we're starting this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there is not a dearth of long-form podcasts out there. So I recognize the noise and the volume that's out there. But one of the things I saw an opportunity, especially with you, is kind of to your point, have a view beyond the valley, hence the name. So you can do your own LinkedIn stalking of both Madison and I, but I spent 7 years in San Francisco proper. I've lived all over the world, Singapore, Seattle. I've been in tech since I graduated college, which was eons ago. But my point is now we're both in SoCal. We kind of get an outside-in view of all things tech. And obviously, post-COVID, Silicon Valley, you could argue, isn't as clustered for tech as it maybe it was previously. However, There obviously still is a lot of innovation and conversations coming out there. And so that's a little bit of play on the words, right? Beyond the valley in topics, beyond the valley of location, obviously, and more importantly, beyond the valley in terms of the point of view. I think there's a lot of wonderful, beautiful things that have come from the valley. You're seeing that if you have watched the inauguration lately in terms of who's running the country right now and the access to power that they have and the executive orders coming out, obviously, but obviously the Valley is a place that's adapting, evolving. Tech is adapting and evolving as well. And so we wanted to create a space for like-minded people to have some healthy debate. Because I know you and I don't necessarily see the world exactly the same, which is beautiful in that sense, and bring, like I said, just a third place, to use Howard Schultz from the CEO of Starbucks, third place for us to come and have these conversations. So like I said, we're committed to doing this for a year, and let's just dive in. So
Yay,
we're coming off of for sure. We're coming off of a fun month of January. Fires for you, fires down here. Obviously,
yes.
anytime you have a new year, you're always looking to restart, renew. One of the things I've been reading and spending some time thinking about is that intersection of equilibrium, happiness, and balance for all the parents out there. I was just telling Madison, I've been up since 2 a.m. because at 2 a.m. I had a little 2-year-old run in and puke all over me. But more importantly, so fun. So I shouldn't say more importantly, but I would say equally, I'm starting to see a lot of these conversations pop up, whether it be on LinkedIn, on Substack, etc. For example, the Loom CTO / co-founder, if you haven't already seen his blog, recently posted about how he basically sold his company for almost $100 million to Atlassian. In every sense of that word, success from a Silicon Valley perspective, that he's miserable. I think now his net worth is around 45 million because he forwent the opportunity to go stay on and have the golden handcuffs at Atlassian. And so he's written a really interesting blog post, if you haven't already read, where he's talking about his journey of going traveling, then trying to be part of Doge, then climbing the Himalayas, and now he's just in the jungle in Hawaii teaching himself physics, right? I left out a lot of that journey, but I'm curious, Madison, from your perspective, we have not had the chance yet to sell our $100 million business, but what's on the docket for you in 2025? How are you looking to balance that equilibrium between happiness, work, and obviously all the other things you have going on?
Yeah, I've gotten much better with this. And also, there's a lot of room for me to expand and continue evolving on this. I think in general, as much as I don't understand what it's like to have $45 million in my bank account, obviously, I think I do really resonate, as a lot of people I think are, with the idea of sort of like money doesn't actually solve everything. And I think, at least for me, and I think this resonates with a lot of other people too, is like, the American dream is very centered around money and material things. It's like you
Capitalism. Yep.
yes, capitalism, exactly. And so you grow up kind of with this programming, like your operating model is do all of these things to get success. Like you go get the job and get the most money that you can with that job, and you go do the things and you sacrifice everything else around you in order to like get those things. And I can speak to my own personal journey, which is like, I had all the things on paper and I was miserable. And I just was like, okay, I have all the things. And I was gaslighting myself. I have all the things. Everybody's reaching out to me being like, oh my gosh, I love that you work at this company, or that you're doing this thing, or I saw you over here. And like the external version was, I guess, on the outside, very good looking. But I can tell you from the inside, like it did not solve anything. It did not actually bring me any kind of like internal value or worth. And so for me, the concept of balance has really been something I've been driving home for the last, I'd probably say year and a half, really actively working on it and making space and time in my daily, weekly, monthly routine in order to add back in things that really fill my cup, outside of, that worth being monetary or with the title that I may have or whatever it is. And I've gone through this journey in consulting in particularly because I think when you're in a W-2 full-time salary job, titles a lot of that, right? It's the internal ecosystem of like the company that you work at. So you're constantly trying to like climb the ladder there. And even if you hop to another job, it's like, okay, well, am I adding a senior title? Am I adding a head of title? Am I, you're still hopping. In the consulting space, like you don't really have a title, right? You're a consultant and you can come in at various stages of company into various roles. You could be talking directly to CEO, you could be talking to the CMO, you could talk into the director of something. Like there's so many different areas for a consultant to come in. So that was like the first area that I shed a lot of, I guess that was like my baby step of shedding kind of that external stuff. It took a while, but also this year in particular, what I'm working on is tapping in more to the creative side. That's really my 2025 goal. So I am starting to take acting classes as an example, just to like tap into like, with improv, like letting go in the
And saying
moment. Very
yes,
hard to
always
do.
saying
Yeah.
yes.
Saying yes, yes, and right.
Yes. And
And so that's been really rewarding for me. And other things like I'm a big music player. Like I love piano, guitar, all that kind of stuff. And I would sacrifice that time because it wasn't purposeful, quote unquote, right? It wasn't going to make me money or do anything. And now I'm really trying to add that back into my life. Health and wellness. And this is not just like food or working out. Of course, that's what's included there, but also too, boundaries I'm including in the health and wellness category.
yes.
And I want to hear your take on this, but like, I think that's maybe the hardest one challenge that I've had is like
Yeah.
when to say no to things, being okay with saying no, being okay leaving something, even if like you're walking away from quote unquote a lot of money or a dream title or whatever that thing may be, walking away because it's not the best thing for you, and just overall having a healthier sense of balance and like it's not just the money, it's not just the title, it's also like my mental space and well-being and what do I need in terms of time or other things that fill my cup, and being comfortable saying no. But I'm curious your thoughts on especially like the whole boundary setting and also what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump into that. Before I do, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned creativity being a focus in 2025.
Yes.
I think a lot of people associate creativity with, like, to your point, the traditional arts, music, dance, etc., which obviously is a big form of creativity. If anyone's ever read the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, she wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She talks about creativity much broader. Like every day, what you and I do in consulting is creative, our problem solving. So I'm curious how you're going to apply that across beyond, I'm going to call the art side, like the traditional creative term, but into other aspects of your life. And more importantly, like to your point about if it's not traditional capitalist KPIs, how are you going to measure, quote unquote, how successful, or hold yourself accountable? Maybe successful is not even the right word. Hold yourself accountable to being creative in every aspect of your life in 25.
That's a really good question. So there's a few answers to that. One is like on the accountability lens. One thing that I've noticed about myself in sort of my reflection is that I need other people in my accountability wheelhouse. Like I think there are some things I don't mind doing on my own, like maybe going to the gym as an example, right? I could go to the gym, I can get a workout in for the most part, and that's fine. But there are some things that I need outside creativity and outside accountability with in order to like keep the momentum forward. So as much as it is like, yes, I'm making time, I think I've also been really active in pulling other people into the creative journey as well, not only for the community aspect and like connecting with like-minded people on a certain topic or whatever it is, but I think it just inherently creates more structure and more accountability into making it happen versus anything else. So like as an example, I have a friend that we're working on sort of like tinkering out like a mobile app for him right now. And like that sounds very engineering focused, but it's very creative. You get to problem solve and think
100%.
about,
Yeah.
the user experience and all of these things, which is fun. In consulting, like I think one of the main reasons I love consulting so much is because you come in to solve problems, and a lot of the time there's sort of this like critical thinking lens that you have to put onto things, and you have to put on the creative hat to understand not only like what's worked in the past that you've seen, but also for this company in particular with like whatever their resources are and goals. And like there's an individualness to every single company. and like modifying your plan and modifying how you're going to approach things based on that company. That also is like juicing that creative lens, and that accountability again is like kind of built in inherently because you have like other people involved in that process. So I think I think it's kind of like actually both. Now that I'm talking through this in real time, I think the accountability and the creativity, even outside of the traditional forms of like piano or like, you know, dance or other things, is like connection and community, I guess, is maybe the underlying root of both of those things. And stretching your brain to think in a way that is maybe a little bit uncomfortable, which I really like, but I understand why maybe other people don't. But I just love it. It's like almost addicting to me in a way where I'm like, oh, I want to think about this from a completely different new lens and see kind of what pops out. And so I love doing that in every aspect. So that could even stretch into consulting, but it could stretch into like, talked earlier about dog training. Like there's so many variables to consider with like dog training that, and you have to put on your hat of being like, maybe I need to think about this from another lens. My approach isn't working. Like there's a fine balance between like evidence-based and data, and also like learning in the moment and using critical thinking to understand maybe I need to apply a different lens and approach to all of this, which I'm putting under the bucket of creativity.
Yeah, for sure. There's big C and little c. For anyone who's
Yeah.
ever done any sort of therapy, you may have heard big T, little t. So I'm directly stealing it from that line of work.
I love it.
Yeah. So let's see, 2025. Well, for those of you who know, I have a 2-year-old, I have a 1-year-old, and I've been doing consulting since 2016, 2017. So way before it was sexy, cool, and in vogue. And if I had known better, I probably would have put together a proper business plan, because once every month at least, I get a call or I have a LinkedIn message from somebody from my network, and I'm sure you do as well, being like, hey, I'm really burned out, or I got laid off, or I need something different. My situation has changed. I'm looking into getting consulting. Can I pick your brain? And it's funny because whenever I do those calls, I'm always telling them, like, I am the worst person for you to talk to, because I'm sure there's YouTube channels and ebooks and all these resources that tell you to have a plan and to do X, Y, and Z. And I just kind of fell into it. And so my point being, because I've been on this journey for so long, almost 8, 9 years, it's been a little bit, it's evolved. And I can talk about the different stages of evolution and where I am today. For today, I think it's really about finding appreciation and gratitude in the everyday suck. And I know that sounds like some Buddhist, like, I don't even know, that is Buddhism, right? Like literally life is suffering. So I guess you could argue that it was again stolen from there. But you know, one thing you said that really resonated with me was, for me, a lot of the insecurity. So when I fell into consulting, I just left Marketo, who was like at the prime peak. It is before they were even bought by Vista, let alone Adobe. And I remember being in San Francisco, the Valley, and I would go to parties or whatever. And of course, because you're in San Francisco, the first question is, hi, what's your name? The second question is, what do you do? And I was so insecure because I thought the term consultant was just like a you failed, you effed up. Like I'm messing around in life. Like I don't have a job. I don't have a, to your point, title or any organization size to define me. And so I would find myself saying, I'm a consultant. But I used to work at companies like blank, Microsoft and Marketo, and I used to live in these places. And it's like, I'm actually really good and competent at what I do. I'm just in a different season of life. And like, right, the classic, if you're insecure, you play way bigger, right? And I'm sure, sorry for those people that I've met. I'm sure it was a very fun company to have. But my point being, you know, that was sort of the first iteration of just being even comfortable, to your point, with myself of like, okay, I'm a consultant and I don't want to say claim that proudly, but make a living off of this. Like, is this even viable for me? And from a financial perspective, I was like, okay, this is working, right? At the very minimum, I'm at least making as much money as I did in a W-2 job, with the exception of, you know, when things happen, aka companies get sold or something like that, which as much as we all would like to believe, it's really holding a lotto ticket, right? A lot of it, no matter how great your product, no matter how great the team, it really is product market fit to a big extent. And I'm sure, talk more about that. But the second phase of that was like, okay, well, now that I'm more secure and I see that there's a viable plan. How do I grow this thing? And I've been very lucky. Like I said, I've kind of, the whole network is your net worth thing. Like I've been all inbound, all referral. The beauty or the painful part of tech is people switch jobs generally every 18 months, 36 months. So my point is I've worked with people at 2 or 3 clients, and hopefully that's a testament to my product and also just, people you want to work with. And so then was into build mode, right? Like, okay, I'm going to figure out. And then, you get to a point where you're taking on 3, 4, 5 clients, you're working a lot. And at some point I was like, you know what? I cannot continue to associate my time to my paycheck. And that became more apparent to me, obviously, once I started having children, because kids don't really give a damn when and where you have to work, and they have their needs when they have their needs. And so obviously I knew about that. And, they always say start a business, start building equity, all that fun stuff. And look, I'm not saying I'm trying to be a multi-millionaire and sell my business for $48 billion and go live in the, excuse me, $1 million and go live in the jungle and learn physics. But at some point, then I started creating courses. I started doing coaching, and I did that, I think, again, before that was cool and in vogue in 2018, 19. But the reason I share this is they were, going back to our creativity conversations, like small experiments of just like, well, if I can do this, let's just see what happens. Maybe no one will buy a course. Maybe 5 people will buy a course. And then, look, it's not an overnight success, but like last year, I had a client who's a Fortune 500 financial services company, and I came in and helped, revamp and start up really their entire product marketing function. But kind of that Steve Jobs quote of like, you don't see how the dots connect until you look back. I say all that not to tout myself on the back, but to really say like the most important step in that whole journey, and that takes me to 2025 piece about embracing the suck, is spending the money, the time, the energy, and the space, and really doing that inner work, to your point, and stretching to be uncomfortable, and finding a place of security, right? You and I have talked about that, going back to that version of Shayna at the party who's like, oh, I used to work at these companies, and like, yeah, these are the people I know, and versus to a place where like, I don't even live in the Valley. I don't travel. I don't speak. I guess I'm starting to create content now. But my point is, just really being more secure and understanding, to your point, what drives me, what motivates me, and more importantly, what do I connect my worth to if it's not those external things. And I think it's continuously a journey. I'm not going to say like, oh my God, I flipped the switch and now I'm like, rocking and rolling every day, every year it evolves. But I think in this season, a lot of it is creating space to create things I'm proud of. And like I said, embracing the suck, because not everything, there's a shit sandwich, like Elizabeth Gilbert says, and everything that you do. And also obviously now with my kids and the family, just being a really good present mom and delivering a childhood, I'm sure, and anyone who has an immigrant background, I grew up in Louisiana. I was the only Asian kid. You can imagine that's a whole other conversation, trauma associated with that. But delivering a childhood to my kids, that I would want to have, right? So, yeah, I think all of that to be said, and everyone says it is a journey, right? It is 100%. And that was the whole point of this Loom CTO's blog post, I think, of he was the happiest, quote, quote, when he was building Loom and they were going in the trenches. And I think there's a little bit of revisionist history there, right? All of us who work towards something during the actual suck, you don't realize how awesome it is, but it's not. Now that he's looking back in hindsight, he was like, oh, that was the happiest time of my life because I had purpose, I was driven, I was needed, and I was grateful for that. And I'm not at all criticizing him and saying that that's not true. Obviously, he is much more self-aware than I would know of his situation. But my point is being, I think often there is revisionist history of like, the suck was awesome. And so if that's the case, because I do think we human beings think that way, just to, protect ourselves and our headspace, then the suck to anyone with young kids, right? It kind of sucks. And then one day you'll look back and you're like, it was awesome to have a family. So similarly, from a consulting or whatever background, it's the day to day. There are moments, there's clients that are rough, there's things that happen, right, in life, and whether you're in a W-2 job or anything, but just embracing and appreciating that and realizing these were the quote unquote good old days, right? And reflecting back, like I said, on my own journey of like 2017, oh my gosh, I was so lost, I was so insecure, I was all over the place. But now I look back, I don't want to say fondly on those days, but I look back and I realize like the suck was the journey, and I'm still on it, obviously, but the dots wouldn't have connected unless I went through that, right? I think YC calls it the the trenches of sorrow or something like that. So anyway, my point being, um, awareness of the suck, so that in hindsight we can go back and say, yeah, those were the good old days, and obviously we're achievers, and there's always another mountain to climb. But pausing to reflect, that is the joy, I suppose.
Yeah, I love the concept of shit sandwich. It just is in your face, and I love that part of it. But also too, it's like so true that you have to choose, like grass is always greener on the other side, right? So you have to choose. And I think for me, I went into consulting at a time where it was like kind of being hyped. Like not everybody was going into it quite yet. There's a lot of people in this space now, but it was just starting to get into a phase where it was like people were leaving companies and going to be consultants, and like immediate success, right? Because the market was really good. People had money to spend on consultants. So like all the stars kind of aligned. And so I remember like as I left, I and decided, okay, I'm gonna do consulting in a full-time way. I definitely had rose-colored glasses on a little bit. And I think I made it up to be something that there's certainly parts of it, like you know, the potential for money is certainly a little bit higher, I would say, than like, you know, a W-2 job. But there's instability that comes with it, right? So like there's with a W-2 job, there's sort of like a little bit of stability. I know layoffs are happening, so that kind of rocks the boat a little bit, but like in general, there's some form of stability in the market. Versus with consulting, it's like, you know, especially if you're not actively driving pipeline, which majority of people I talk to who are consultants don't actively drive pipeline. They're either referral based or they have long-term engagements or like whatever that kind of is. And so you end up kind of going, okay, I actually don't know what I'm going to be doing in 6 months. Like literally, I have no idea. I could have 3 clients. I could have none. I could have, you know, it's like so open and in the air. There's invoicing and accounting and like all of, you know, the taxes are different. And like, there's just, which for me is, I hate monotonous work. So that's a big
Find a good
downside.
accountant. Find a good accountant. For everyone watching who wants to be a consultant, find a good accountant.
Yes, 1000%. It's so hard to keep track of everything. But yeah, what's your shit sandwich? Going back to what you said, like you have to decide there are shitty things that happen in W-2s, and there are also shitty things that happen in consulting. And like there is no perfect option out there, and you have to decide like what you're willing to eat and what you're willing to
Yeah.
do. So I really love your approach on that. But I'm interested to hear your perspective on sort of the creativity lens as well that we talked about, like how that is forming into your either consulting or outside of consulting in 2025, and sort of the boundary stuff we were talking about earlier as well. I'm curious how that all
Yeah.
together.
Well, let's talk about it in the context of consulting, since it sounds like we are down that train, but to your point, we can obviously widen that aperture. So, the thing I've been thinking about recently, obviously, with all the conversation about AI agents or Gen AI, or last year was the year of Gen AI, and this year is the year of AI agents. And I talk to a founder at least once every month who's like, should I pivot my messaging and positioning to be AI agent focused? And if so, is that actually something that a C level would buy versus a PLG strategy? Right. And we start kind of knick-knacking all of that. And my perspective on the creativity piece is like mini MINI experiments, right? Of seeing ultimately what lands, because I don't think anyone knows and everyone's looking for a silver bullet, right? It's all so new, right? And you have even the world's most well resourced and backed people taking different approaches, right? Like if you think about Reid Hoffman with his Pi, basically all in one agent, for lack of a better term, versus obviously the hundreds of companies that are now building very specific AI agents to do like one little thing. The one thing I do hear time and time again is like this hesitancy or fear to even test or start or move quickly. So here's what I mean by that. I'm sure you take a lot of, first calls, or you're just meeting a lot of founders or C-level, and the number one thing they'll tell me is don't look at our website. It doesn't actually explain what we do.
Yeah, I hear that
And
a lot.
it's 2025, right? We have these amazing website tools that technically make it very easy for you to stand up a website literally in minutes. And yet that fear of, I know what the shovel I'm working on is awesome, but I don't know how to talk about it. And more importantly, I don't know how to talk about the whole is something I hear time and time again. And part of, the technology play is also like going back to creativity is like you can test many things, you can do different versions of it, but I think a lot of people still are hesitant of just like doing something. They'd rather go take 5 calls with different consultants, investors, board members, etc., who all have a different point of view because obviously they're not in the trenches with you, versus just saying like, hey, we tried this landing page for X amount of days, here's what we saw, we tried this landing page. So adapt or die, I guess.
Mhm.
It's a
Yeah.
really, really dramatic way of saying it, but something I'm even challenging myself to do. Because when I was in the W-2 workforce, there was no AI, at least real AI. There were definitely no AI agents, right? And so in this year and beyond, and at the pace at which we're all moving, I think all of us as product marketers, as go-to-market folks, need to really think about what is the story, what is the whole that our clients or buyers are actually looking to solve, and how do we tell that story organically so it's communicated in their language. So
Yeah.
I don't know, that's just kind of one of the things I've been grappling with and challenging myself with as well. How about you, Madison?
Yeah, no, I love everything you just said. And I think it's probably an important distinction that we should call out the difference between positioning, messaging, and copy. I feel
Yeah.
like they get really like they're the same thing in a lot of
Yeah.
people's eyes. And I do understand it, especially if you're not in the marketing world. I think I get it. Like from the outside looking in, I do understand the confusion there. But I think it's like really, really, really important, especially for leadership, for, a CEO, for founders to
For the board.
understand, to the board, yes, to understand like why these things are different and um the variations you can have, what you can test, right? Like going back to your point about like testing and like iterating on things, what are you testing and iterating on versus what stays consistent and for how long? And I hear sort of these questions indirectly, I guess, in my experience. Like it's one of those things where you don't know what you don't know, right? So
Yeah.
for a lot of people, they don't know what they don't know. And so it's our job as consultants to come in and sort of like decouple that and say, here's
Yep.
the difference between everything. So maybe we start there, but then I think there's also, talking about the strategic narrative side of things and like where that
Yeah.
comes in too. So maybe we start there. What do you think?
I think that's awesome. Why don't you kick us off if you'd like
Yeah.
on what positioning is, and then I can dive into messaging, and then we can kind of attack copy together because that's probably the easiest one because it's the one that obviously most people read.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So positioning is basically like the strategic side of like who you're doing it for, why you're doing it, how you're competitively different, like deep positioning maybe against some of your competitors, and really
Or
just
do nothing and business as usual, which is often your top competitor.
status quo. Yes. Top competitor. Why are you better than the status quo? Why are you better than doing nothing? And so it's more of no one's ever going to see your positioning. It should come through in the messaging and copy that you're talking about, but no one's ever going to see your positioning externally. That is an internal facing document to get everybody on the same page. Who we are, what we're doing, what we're calling ourselves, what category are we in, what are the competitors and status quo, and basically getting alignment about what those things are and making sure that you have, I like to do, I know everyone has their different style, but I really like to have a one sentence positioning kind of framework that I work under. And it's different for each company. Direct to consumer is a little bit tweaked versus B2B, large enterprise. And so having that like one sentence positioning to make sure everybody's on the same page before you move to messaging, before you move to copy, that really sets out what your differentiator is and what your value is in this particular market, in this particular climate, against the particular competitors or status quo in your environment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like the play bigger guys and a few other folks, heavy hitters in the valley, have really made category creation a thing. I still feel like I get one of those calls a quarter. So,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts on category creation? I'm obviously happy to give mine as well.
I hate category creation personally. I think it's one of those things that I find is more impactful to board and CEO than it is actually to the market. I find that, we saw this with Gong. I think we can all agree Gong did a really, great job in terms of like their marketing strategy. But one of the things that I always like to draw attention to is like they call themselves a revenue intelligence tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that to the average person shopping, they're not looking for big and fluffy. They're looking to solve a problem. Like at the end of the day, we are selling painkillers, not vitamins, right?
Yep.
And so I think that from a buyer perspective, from a user perspective, category rarely means anything. And so while I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important for some things, let me give you an example. If you're in the, enterprise B2B space and you're working with Gartner, you really need to lean in to a category and like maybe creating a new category if you want, to streamline something within the Gartner kind of review and referral space. So in some contexts, it makes sense to double down on that or to really emphasize it. But I think when you're just talking about like on your website, talking to end users or buyers or whatever it may be, they just don't care about
Yeah.
what category you're in. I'm curious your thoughts though.
Yeah, I laugh a little bit because again, we're gonna call some companies out, but obviously it's completely from a place of they've done very well and been very successful and built multi-million-dollar businesses. So please take that with a grain of salt if you're watching this. I was laughing because yes, Gong went with revenue intelligence, and then ZoomInfo recently has gone with go-to-market intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're really trying to say, well, if you're just revenue, we're go-to-market. And to your point, I think unless you are willing and able to dedicate significant resources, money, time, press, influencers, partnerships, obviously first party content, third party events to creating a category, it's rough. It's hard. It's easier to be a better mousetrap in an existing category. And then once you have a certain amount of groundswell, then reposition yourself within that category or away from that category. So I'll give you an example. We were at Marketo. Obviously, this is outdated now. But for those of you who don't know, Marketo is very simply put a marketing automation platform. Okay. That is the category as defined by, I'm sure there's, I forget the multi-channel marketing, something like that. But anyway, for all intent and purposes, it's a marketing automation platform. And we were competing at the time when Salesforce bought Pardot and Eloqua was bought by Oracle with literally Salesforce and Oracle, which obviously have billions of dollars in the bank, will give away software for free. So my point is, it's not exactly like we're competing on an even field. It wasn't until we were truly pointed towards enterprise. So I think enterprise is 5,000 and above is how we defined it at that time. And then, like I said, we were competing 9 out of 10 times with the Oracle and Salesforce that we started to heavily invest in the new category of engagement marketing. And I have to give the flowers, the kids say, now to our VP of product marketing, who's now done awesome stuff, and the CMO over at Workato, Chandar, who really helped teach the team to think about how to do category creation correctly. And one thing that he did that I would say was really smart is that he made it super easy for sales and CS, aka revenue teams, and the ones on the ground to communicate the category and what it actually is and the benefits from it. So this was in 2015, 2016. It's 10 years later. I can still recite it, right? Engagement marketing is driving personal, durable, long-term relationships with the ABCDEs as individuals based on what they do continuously over time, directed towards an outcome everywhere they are. It's been 10 years and I still know how to deliver that pitch. And so my point is, we really spent a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resources, board level down, honing, tapping. And that was for, I don't want to say survival, but you can imagine when you're, like I said, competing with literally Fortune 100 companies. And I would even argue like we were successful in the sense that we had a community and they were very loudly shouting and on our behalf and advocating, I should say. But even then, I would argue like it's not like now when you look back at Marketo, you're like, oh, it was an engagement marketing platform, right? You still think of it as what it was, which was, to your point about positioning, a marketing automation platform. I just share that example not to say that it cannot be done. I'm just saying even at a company as focused, as resourced, as deliberate at Marketo, who sells some marketers, obviously, it was still a tough hill to climb for us.
Yeah.
And obviously other companies have had different, success. I think the Play Bigger guys, and huge respect to what they've done, and I know they do a lot of great work with tech companies, is like at the beginning, to your point about, vitamin versus painkiller, just go and articulate the specific pain that you actually solve, and then back that into your specific use case and make it simple, simple, simple. I think you and I'm sure take a lot of Series A or even Series C and below, Series D and below calls, and they're like, well, we do everything. We're a Swiss Army knife. We are for marketing. We're for sales. We're for CS. We're for or whatever, right? We're for agencies. We're for partners. And I'm like, whoa, if it's going to take you 30 minutes for me, since your website doesn't actually tell you what you do, tell me what you do, to distill down what your value prop is, there's no way in hell you can expect, your buyer at whatever use case that you're talking about to be able to actually spend the time to figure it out. So that's my 2 cents on category creation. I agree. It's a bit of a dirty word. And I obviously, for everybody who watches this, I'm sure they're going to comment and be like, well, here's the 10 times it's been successful. Absolutely right. I'm not saying that it's not viable or doable, but it's a lot easier to write coattails and tailwinds than it is to, build from the ground up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a big thing, especially in the VC backed, like Silicon Valley, like as a whole. I think it's over hyped a little bit, like category creation. You want to create a new category and not understanding like the meat that goes into actually category creation for that versus just I mean, I really like the phrase you use, like writing on the coattails of the existing category, because you don't want to have to teach a whole market how to think about something differently, because people don't like to do that at all.
Problem aware versus not problem aware. Right?
Yeah,
exactly. Totally.
And there's a lot of money in that. And
totally. You bring up a good point, which is board level deck versus like customer level deck. Two different things. And that's to your point where I think positioning can really come into play. Like it took Gainsight years, and Gainsight's obviously very successful, Vista back now, to even get customer success software, whatever the official category is in Gartner. Don't kill me. You can quickly Google it. But my point is to even get Gartner, Forrester to like officially make a quadrant and or a wave about that. And they are highly successful and put a ton of Nick's awesome, like books, resources, anything. My point being like, it's not for the faint of heart. And in some ways, depending what size you are, you're just trying to show product market fit and momentum.
Yes, I agree. And so how do you feel like positioning, category creation is reflected, or just, writing on the coattails of an existing category, like to make it easy on yourself, right? How do you feel like that's reflected in messaging? And have you encountered any issues with your current clientele where you're having to distinguish the difference actually between the two?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. So I've had a client in the past, for example, where let me take a step back. So we talked about positioning being around the category of what you play, and the messaging should then be who you are, what you do, and how are you different, right? And I really honing in and simply answering those questions. I always am telling CROs or my husband's in sales, I can pick on him, like every time you do a pitch, there's 3 questions you should be answering. Why category, why company, why now, right? And so why category is hopefully some positioning. Why company is where we get to the messaging and the fun part. And then, of course, why now to some extent. We can talk about what makes a good pitch deck, part of the strategic narrative, as you kind of brought up earlier, and to some extent maybe touches on copy. So when I think about really good messaging, and maybe the Marketo example seeps from that, it should be memorable, concise, repeatable. Because good messaging is not just good enough so that your sales team can deliver it, but it's your sales team can then deliver it to their champ in a B2B context, and then their champ is then able to articulate that to his or her boss and or his or her peers. My point is, it's almost like a game of telephone, right? And so if you have complicated, intellectually stimulating, buzzwordy, AI created, LLM created messaging, I guarantee you it's probably not that memorable, concise, and repeatable, because AI is obviously just trained on what you feed it. And I would argue that it probably has not been fed a lot of great messaging, because frankly, really great messaging is hard to come by and hard to reinforce. And obviously, manufacturing and delivery, right? It's not just about the manufacturing of the messaging, but also the delivery. So that's probably a good segue into your question, which is around like, hey, do you have any clients have really had to educate everyone top down on positioning and messaging? And so, I often think about a client of mine who is in the security space. So literally, if anyone knows what MyTech or Jumio do, they basically, when you log into your Chase or Wells Fargo app, they look at your phone, or when you want to deposit a check, they're basically, it's called KYL or KYCAML. So know your customer, basically fraud detection, right? And so it was an awesome company. It was started by two guys who used to lead the trust team over at Airbnb. So obviously you can imagine Airbnb, a lot of fraud and fraud detection, I should say, technology are being invested in. And so they actually got bought by a bigger company. But one of the things that they really struggled with is like, what do we even call ourselves? Like, what is the position? What is the category in which we play in? Is it fraud detection? But we're not like these legacy players because we do it so much better because we have, X more biometric, what do you call it? Touch points or whatever it may be. Right. And kind of going back to our previous conversation, what I really worked with the team on is saying, look, trust at the end of the day is what you guys are delivering, right? The category, or excuse me, the positioning / category may be already created. And that's where those legacy players that I talked about already play in. But in terms of messaging, you guys literally were the trust team at Airbnb. So trust, the joke I had with them is, if you're familiar with the Grateful Dead, obviously they have the Deadheads. Like literally there's this group of people out there, and I joke and call them the trust heads, who like love you guys because of what you guys did in the industry. And how do we then tap into that community and really message to them, this is, a modern ways company of establishing trust. And it's, and then we can go into feature, and then obviously translate that into copy for all of our campaigns and things like that. And obviously it's a very discerning buyer, right? Anytime you're selling into financial services, you're selling into IT, and you're selling cybersecurity, trust. My point is their job literally is to de-risk. Lawyers is another one, de-risk things for the company. So my point is, it's not like selling, love marketers, right? But marketing, sales, that's a little bit different in terms of how discerning the buyer is to a piece of technology or to a new solution. So my point is really writing that messaging coattail again around, okay, yeah, we're in this category of where the traditional layers lie, but our messaging is really focused on early easy trust, or I forgot exactly where we landed, but the ability to set up the trust function effectively within your organization within 30 days. I mean, that was just a huge differentiator for them, and something we really spent some time honing in on when we started thinking about messaging. Because I think before, founders, brilliant, very much focused on how cool the tech was and why it was better than the legacy, but really taking a step up and saying, we founded trust at Airbnb. We can help you found trust at your company in less than 30 days using the highest standard, blah, 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 blah. So that might be a oversimplified example of how to think about an existing category. And then, of course, honing in the messaging on those differentiators and writing the coattails. I mean, obviously, Airbnb still hot, but even more hot at that time of being able to really navigate that world.
Yeah, as you were talking, I kind of triggered something in my brain, like the difference. And we could probably go a whole podcast on this, so maybe we'll just briefly touch on it. But like, I think product marketing has a very unique and interesting job right now, especially in the B2B space, because brand marketing is not really a thing. If you have a brand marketer, it's typically someone who owns like the visual design system and like, all of that, which is an important part of brand, don't get me wrong. But I think there's also like the brand feeling that comes across in words as well. The tone of which you're talking, how are you instilling, to your point, trust? Like there's not just explicitly saying trust. There's also these like micro moments that happen throughout your entire interactions with, the website, the product, like whatever it may be, that reinforces that as well. So I'm curious your take on this. I have maybe a bit of a controversial take on like,
We like it.
product and brand marketing together, but I'm just curious, like, do you think about that as you're putting together your messaging?
I'm curious what your hot take is on brand marketing.
I do have a hot.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. My pet peeve is sometimes like getting into these positioning meetings with brand people, and brand people, to your point, are amazing. And obviously, more than ever in today's ecosystem, brand and community is what's going to propel organic, distribution of your awareness and obviously of your product. But sometimes this is obviously a huge generalization. It can becomes very lofty, like, and what about this? And what about this? And then it becomes this like, because I get it, a lot of them have backgrounds in PR, and so it's all about telling this big meaty story because it needs to be topical, and we can latch on to this, and I don't think that your buyers care at that level. Great for the 3-inch headline, great for your above the fold potentially on your website, but once you get down to an actual cycle in a B2B, or when you're actually in the consideration phase for B2C, I would argue people just want to know, what do you do? How do you do it? How do you do it better? Right. And I think from a messaging perspective, a lot of CEOs may conflate brand with product marketing. And that's where you get these like lofty things on a website where I'm like, I don't even know what that means. I literally spent the website some time going through a website, and I still don't know what this company does.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Sometimes it can get into a really lofty conversation. Something that I have started to do in the last few years, I used to have a pretty hard line in the sand between brand and product marketing, and it was very divided. And I've noticed over time a gap in the general market of just like product marketing as a whole, where the messaging, there's ways that you can say things in your messaging and even in your copy too that reinforces the word trust, going back to that example, without necessarily explicitly calling out trust.
Yep.
Like
100%.
And so, and I think it like is in both, right? And so what I typically have started doing if I work with a client is I've added a brand section into my like positioning doc that's like, what do you want people to feel like when you're talking about this? And I find that that informs the messaging. Like, of course, you need all the, bare bones product marketing things of positioning too, what it is, how it's different, all of that stuff. But also too, separate from that, which I'm kind of touting as like your company IP, right? There's a lot of things that go into that, but like that brand feeling, right?
Yeah.
Color plays a role. Don't get me wrong. So you still are working with like your art director, brand team, whatever that is to influence that as well. But I just find that like by adding that in and like having product marketing take on some of that brand role just ever so slightly has helped me personally make sure that feeling, because at the end of the day, like we're all humans, we buy with emotion. And when you're working with a client, they make decisions based on emotion. Like this is normal. This is like how the world operates. And so making sure to like add that flavor of emotion back into the messaging, the copy, all the things that kind of come down the fold, I just have noticed brings a lot more peace and clarity to the founder, that if I'm working with a founder or with, another product marketer or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. That kind of leads us to the third piece of the puzzle, or the stool, whatever language you want to use, which is copy, right? And often you have a copywriter who is hopefully looking at a brand guideline, looking at some guardrails, looking at brand tone, voice, all that fun stuff, and taking your messaging and translating that into copy for campaigns. So those then become the actual words that are on a landing page, that are on an email, et cetera, et cetera. I have worked at companies where we didn't have that, and product marketing, to your point, are the ones that end up writing the copy. I think that's actually very normal, especially in smaller companies, et cetera. And so my point being, that's where, to your point, taking in consideration working hand in hand with brand, I think is really, really important. I'm curious from your perspective, where have you seen the biggest misconception around like strategic narrative versus brand versus product marketing? Can you maybe talk about how you've seen those three things work together?
Yeah, I think that strategic narrative seems to be more in the B2B, and especially more the enterprise leaning B2B side of things. Just in general, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist in direct consumer or into like more the SMB market. It just is that it's, I guess, less of a expected thing. I think a lot of buyers who are, buyers in large B2B enterprises, especially if they've bought software before, it's almost like they have inherent expectations kind of going into that sales cycle of what they're going to hear. So part of it is like playing into that. But I think it's important to call out the difference between messaging and strategic narrative specifically. Strategic narrative is storytelling, right? Messaging is what you're saying. So it should encompass all the things of like, the brand and the positioning that we just talked about. The copy is like, of course, like if you're presenting a deck, right? You should not, I hope everyone's listening to this, you should not put word for word your exact like one-liner messaging into that. That will rarely work. You have to like storytell and weave that through, and the copy may be a little bit different or shorthand or maybe bite-sized takeaways of that information on a slide deck, right? That they're seeing. But the strategic narrative, I like to think is like the storytelling. And depending on what stage you are of the company, depending on who the client you're talking to is, like whether, again, they're Fortune 500 or they're a mom and pop shop, like that's going to all differentiate how high you go versus how niche and specific you go. At least in my opinion. I'm curious if you have a similar experience, but the storytelling piece when you're speaking to an early adopter versus a laggard, like on that go-to-market, chasm roller coaster analogy that I'm use. Yeah. Who you're talking to is going to depend on like what that narrative is speaking to, how big you're going to go. I think there's also a version of the strategic narrative that you're talking to investors and board members that's, again, to your point, going to be different than your, early adopter market or whatever it may be. Do you find do you find that the two are conflated, right? Messaging and strategic narrative?
It's funny. I'm going to pick on my husband again because he's in sales, so I can talk shit about sales. The best salespeople tell stories because, as you know, people remember stories and not facts. And to your point, that's how I view a strategic narrative. It is a story that is memorable, concise, and repeatable. And Andy Raskin does a really good job. I think he does some category creation messaging stuff with CEOs, but of laying out this framework that I think is very common now in B2B SaaS, where like you start with what's the big relevant change in the world. So like obviously for a lot of companies right now, it's AI or AI agents or it's productivity or it's efficiency gains or whatever, right? Then you try to quickly articulate winners versus losers. So in this new world where this is happening, the winners are doing this, and the negative consequences, aka the losers, are doing this. Then you tease the promised land. So imagine a world if your solution, and more importantly, the outcomes that your solution delivers. Then you go into like the magic gifts of why differentiators, your solution overcomes the obstacles that are ahead of you. And then, of course, customer evidence and or proof points. And so I think the companies that have, to your point, been able to land a strategic narrative well have been able to take basic like Shakespearean 101 storytelling and apply that framework, a hero's odyssey, right? A hero's journey, excuse me, to how they think about how the world is changing. And more importantly, going back to my why category, why company, why now? Why now comes first. It's what's the big, relevant, impactful thing that is changing. The number of times I talk to CEOs, sales leaders, sales people, and they're just like, okay, we help you deliver efficiency and effectiveness, and ROI. I'm like, okay, I've always wanted efficiency.
Someone says ROI one more time, I'm gonna.
I've always wanted effectiveness. I've always wanted ROI, but like, why now? Right? Do more with less. Supercharge. Got you. Yes. Had that same problem for 10 years. Why now? This is the key between nice to have versus need to have. And so going back to our high level framework of, positioning, or excuse me, category / positioning, messaging, copy, strategic narrative. I almost see strategic narrative as like the overlay that you should really be delivering, to your point, across brand and definitely messaging into, obviously, to some extent, copy. And it's usually where I actually start with clients, because what I often find, and depending on, what the founder's background is, if they're in engineering, if they're in product, if they're in the sales side, they are good at one part of that, or great at 2 or 3 parts of that. But they sometimes, and it's hard to see, the label from inside the bottle, able to stitch together that beginning, middle, of end of like this big thing has happened in the world. here's going to be the result of that, winners and losers. Here's what the promised land could look like for you. Here's how we deliver that and overcoming the obstacles along your way. And then, of course, here's how we de-risk it for you, aka the customer stories and our proof points. And so, look, it's hard, right? Like if this was easy, you and I wouldn't have jobs, and obviously, and other companies, would there would be more companies being able to stitch that together. But I would say, like, when you look at the best marketers in the world, Donald Trump, Mark Benioff, they have a knack of doing this, right? Going back to the anti-software piece, right? That Benioff started with. He was like a SaaS. I mean, obviously, this is back pre-SaaS, but that was his big thing, right? No more on-prem. We're green. We're going to be all about the SaaS. And now he's obviously taking that even further with Agent Force, and we're all about AI agents. And it's not about being, software, but it's about software independence and what that actually means. So my point is, for better or for worse, whatever your opinions are about Benioff or the software or Trump or whatever, they've been able to latch onto something that's very topical, a big relevant change in the world, and ride the coattails and talk about how their solution, it looks like a better promised land. And if you ally with them, you will be on the winning side.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about having variations of strategic narrative depending on the market? So as an example, there are some things, especially if you're doing something really new, where people may not even know that they have the problem, right?
Yeah, for sure.
If they are brought in through the funnel and talked about like, hey, we see a lot of people with this pain point, maybe they're going, what? Versus people who are very pain aware, and maybe they're even becoming solution aware, like in the different phases, right? Do you typically like want people to wrap their head around one first and then expand later? Do you start by having kind of minor variations between the two? Like, how do you typically see it?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but generally, I would say we try to meet people where they are, right? So, to your point, known needs and unknown needs, right? Or problem aware or not problem aware. Even if you are problem aware, it is our job as product marketers, as marketers, as leaders in the company to empower you to articulate your problem, like I said earlier, to your boss, to your peers, so that you can go and secure budget for this thing. I think one of the traps that companies get stuck in is they have users that love them and they do an amazing job of messaging to their users, and they get stuck because their users are not then empowered to go articulate the problem to someone who is problem unaware, aka their boss, who actually holds the PO purchase power, right? So that's a long way of saying, like, and we can talk about what a sales play is, and obviously how that cascades down from a strategic narrative depending on persona, stage, etc., competitor, etc. But I will say that one of the things that I encourage every salesperson to be able to do is still be able to tell a strategic narrative to your champion, even if the user is not the buyer or the economic buyer at the end of the day, just because the complexity of a buying cycle, especially in B2B, obviously, for something to get over the line. And then you come to me and you say, oh, but we're PLG. I don't need a strategic narrative. What do you say to that, Miss PLG?
Oh my gosh. No, I literally just got chills all over my body when you said that. I mean, we should definitely do a whole episode just on like PLG, because I could probably talk for 30 minutes just on what the misconceptions are in the industry. But as a whole, like, there is no company that I know of. If you're a company that's doing PLG and you don't have an enterprise buying, a sales team, like a process, you're not PLG, you're direct to consumer. So like, if you're in the B2B space of things, if you're PLG, you always, always, always still have a sales cycle, and you still need to talk to a buyer, and it's just a different growth mechanism. You have another growth path, right? Through like the product itself. And also, I would argue it's a proof point, right? Everyone on my team uses it. We love it. Like it's de-risking the situation, so to speak.
100%. Yeah.
Versus other things. But no, you always, always, always still need to have strategic narrative. You have to be able to talk to a buyer. You have to be able to expand and upsell. You have to have that strategic narrative to go across the organization rather than just the like 3-person team you started with or whatever it may be. So no, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not one or the other ever. It's PLG and
I think the other thing that I've seen makes or like strategic narrative really powerful is when you have a mouthpiece, and that sounds really terrible. But my point is that there's a CEO, a CIO, a CTO. It doesn't have to be the C level. It's just someone who's like super passionate on the front lines, banging the drum at conferences, online, through social media, et cetera, really talking about the change. And I think, a lot of these companies, you have like a CEO who writes the book. And I want to say to some extent, like I don't want to say an outdated playbook, but you're seeing this shift towards populism, right? And I'm not trying to get political here, but my point is people are becoming more and more distrustful of like logos, right? Of, oh, I'm going to go into your funnel and you're going to feed me a bunch of crap and I have to you're gating everything and I have to fill out 10,000 forms, right? And that's why you're seeing this push towards organic community-led growth, and part of community organic-led growth is rallying your group around a strategic narrative that hopefully your, I don't want to say mouthpiece, but a leader in your company can really go and articulate and drive passion around. So going back to AI agents, for example, or Gen AI, I mean, a really interesting narrative may be, and I'm just riffing out loud, if I'm Zoom Info, and again, I obviously don't know how they're thinking about it, is like AI agents are a fad. They're dead. You're not going to hire 10,000 automated workers that may or may not talk to each other, that may or may not be in the same systems, that may or may not actually be streamlined to work together to do individual tasks. You actually want to buy the entire army. You want to buy the entire company, whatever metaphor you want to use to actually come in and solve the outcomes that you actually want, right? So you don't want an AI person that just does an AI agent that just does company research. You don't want one that just does scheduling. You don't want one that just does whatever, like email. You want one AI agent, whatever language you want to use, that actually does the whole journey from end to end, which is, I think, what Zoom Info is going after with this whole go-to-market intelligence piece, right? So anyway, that's where maybe some category creation would be interesting. So you basically say you don't need agents, you need armies or something like that, whatever, right? They're smart, intelligent, very capable product marketing team would come up with. But that's kind of how I would see the world of like, you really want somebody championing that, that is, like I said, topical and a big relevant change, and saying, if you come with us on this journey, you'll be one of the winners.
Mm-hmm. How often do you think that people should be modifying their positioning, messaging, strategic narrative in this AI world? Because I think before, we hear different things, 6 months, a year, like it varies. People will tell you kind of like different variations of like when you should refresh. But I think it's really interesting in this particular time that we're in, because so many things are changing so fast with AI.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
I'm curious, like if anyone's listening who's like either, a founder of an AI forward company, or in the process of developing one, or an employee at a company that's very AI focused, like I'm curious your perspective on how often that should be revisited and modified.
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, I don't think anyone really knows. We'll all learn together. But I will say, if you look at really good storytelling, and that's what, again, a strategic narrative is at these companies, they've stood the test of time. Their narrative arcs. So like going back to Gainsight, they've always been touting CS, maybe different parts of CS, whether it should be data-driven, whether it should be dashboard-driven, whether it should be AI-driven now, I'm sure, or agent-driven now. But it's always been the narrative arc of, if you're not investing in CS, and therefore if you don't have purpose-built software for CS, then you're a loser in that example we gave, right? If you look at Marketo, right, it was all always around this automating the marketing and the engagement, and obviously, whether that's through mobile, through lead management, through B2C marketing, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's not about, again, revolution versus evolution. I feel like nowadays companies should pick a religion, tout the religion, right? And then you can make micro adjustments. I think people give you, I don't say buyers, give permission, but like, again, I'm going to go back to like the Donald Trumps of the world. Again, not trying to get political, but just literally one of the best marketers, you could argue, whether you like him or hate him. He's obviously been able to convince a lot of people to go and ally themselves with him. His narrative arc hasn't changed, but if you notice, the micro things have really changed, right? He's all about like America first, business, deregulation, right? But what that actually means day to day, or year to year, or freaking hour to hour, it has really evolved. So I would say, whatever the question I always like to ask founders is, it's 5 years from now, you've crushed it. You're public. You're standing up at NASDAQ, ringing the bell. The confetti has fallen. What have you done?
Yeah.
What problem have you solved? What have you built? Okay, that's the genesis, to your point, of your strategic narrative. You can have many pivots along the way, but the big macro thing, um, I don't think will evolve that much. Is that what you're seeing too?
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because I think that there's a pivot problem, maybe is the best way to describe it. It's a fine line. This is especially true with smaller companies, but I've seen it in large companies too. Like, I think it's just sort of, when do you pivot? How frequently do you pivot? Are they micro pivots or are they full pivots? And then that really translates, and like there's a waterfall effect to positioning, messaging, strategic narrative, all that stuff. So I think your point is spot on. Your reason for being, your company's purpose, like, shouldn't really evolve. Like, that is a
Yeah.
full pivot, right? Like, if you started out and you were like, I really want to help marketers in their everyday, and then you are like, actually, screw marketers, let's help salespeople. Like, that is quite fundamentally a different product altogether, right? That is a large pivot that could possibly be a different company. Whereas micro pivots, like to the example I just used, if you're like, our mission in life is to help marketers do their jobs better, easier, whatever it is, and AI comes along, well, now you're just infusing AI to make that process better, more efficient. But the core of why you exist and what problem you're solving for people is still relevant and it's still there. It's just sort of the how that you're doing it and the additional value that comes with AI in order to like meet the goal that you're trying to meet and solve the problem that you're trying to solve. So I agree with you. I think it's like the problem focused and people focused narrative rather than the
100%.
actual technology side of things.
Yeah, we should have a segment. It's like top things we hate to hear from founders, and one of them is always for me like, can we have more AI in there?
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you want me to just take the AI salt shaker and be like, yeah, hyphenate AI with AI, driven through AI, across AI? Yeah,
Yeah.
no, totally. I always am telling people like AI is table stakes now, to your point. And so yes, of course we'll put it as part of your messaging, and yes, we should have topics dedicated to it, but taking the AI salt shaker to your website is not going to be the thing that's actually going to drive that much product market fit for you. It's kind of an expected thing now.
And also, I'll add to that using my improv. And yes, and
And
also,
yes,
and also, I think that we're at a really interesting time because I'm noticing people being really skeptical of AI. Like, I think when AI first came around and everyone's talking, up AI, which they should be, in all the AI agents, and you will have to pivot your job, and like all this very futuristic thinking about AI. And I think people had a lot of expectations going into AI. And I know so many people who have abandoned AI or toned down how much they're using
oh,
AI.
interesting.
Yeah, because they're like, they go in and they're like, yeah, it's fine. Like, I brainstorm a little bit with it, but like, I just use it off the cuff. And it really takes, I mean, we could do a whole segment on like the right kind of prompting, because like, I think that's like literally half the battle, if not more, as people fall off. But I notice in a lot of conversations, especially with buyers of large enterprises, which have more security and more things that they have to think about with AI, but just with everyone, because AI is talked about everywhere, it's now noise. So to your point, you
Yeah.
have to compete in it because like everyone's AI now. If you're not doing AI, people kind of look at you and go like, why not? And at the same time, everyone's AI. And so everyone's going, okay, but are you really AI? Are you just machine learning with like a little tinge to it? Or are you actually like using an LLM? Or are you actually, doing something that I'm going to see with my own two eyes, where you are providing extreme value, right? Because that's what AI should be providing, extreme value,
Yeah.
more than like your average software.
Yeah.
And I find that people are really skeptical towards it. So
Yeah.
I think that in general, it's a catch-22 where you have to compete in the market of AI, no matter what you're doing, where
Yeah.
you're going. And also, you can't just speak the speak. You have to walk the walk. And you have to really show people, because people are really skeptical on the AI sprinkle that's happening right now, where you put AI on top of everything. And they want to know, Is it going to be easy to use? Am I actually going to find value from it? Are you actually AI? And so making sure that you have juice to back it up as well is really important.
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe that's where the AI agent thing is getting its tailwinds right now, because in theory, it's more action oriented. I had a client where, I guess in the world of consulting, you just end up doing all kinds of things, all hands on deck, whether or not it's product marketing. But long story short, I stood up an AI SDR solution for them, one of the very popular ones that I'm sure all of us um, may have heard of. But long story short, the use case was, we're going to get like 3,000 people at our booth. We want this AI agent to reach out to everybody immediately based on obviously a personalized outreach based on what you can find about them on LinkedIn, whatever. And the call to action should be to book a meeting, because it was like a 4-day conference and more in depth if they're interested. And then there was obviously caveats with that, right? So in other words, there was a tier 1 list that do not touch, because obviously that's CEOs, friends and families, or board investors or whatever. And then obviously there were some other caveats in terms of regions, and it was such a mess. And granted, this was early last year. So my point is, or excuse me, mid last year. So things have changed, but like there were just things you wouldn't have thought about that, even with all of our planning, even with working with that company hand in hand, and they were a great partner. Language. I'm not a native English teacher. Okay, crap. Well, okay, how would I know that? By like indicating that online? Okay, great. So number 2, you have time zone issues. So then people are like, why are you emailing me at 3 a.m? Okay, like that's another issue. Number 3, routing issues. Number 4, the personalized outreach is like not that personalized, because this person actually doesn't have that thing, or their LinkedIn is outdated. And so now we're like, hey, at an Acme company, and I'm not with Acme anymore. Or like, I talked to you. You don't remember that? And then, all the fun mop operations things in the back end of like a do not contact actually gets contacted, or it's an outdated email or whatever. I mean, I can do a whole podcast, I'm sure, on that, and the 3 people that care. But my point is, I just think the biggest thing is this has put my brand and this has put my reputation at risk. And I think the answer is still yes, to some extent, right? Like, even in that scenario that we were talking about just now, we ended up pivoting one day into the conference. Instead of letting it go on autopilot, basically it would pre-write everything, and then I would have an SDR go and manually like check them, at least for like the tier 1, tier 2 leads, at least the outreach, right? And then literally delete the ones that I was like, no. So my point is, and again, this will all get better. I'm sure it's better by now, like by the time we're talking, but my point is, like, no one wants to be the guinea pig.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting, because I think that product marketing in the more earlier days of B2B SaaS, like especially in like the early 2000s, back when Salesforce was like really, starting and things like that, I think messaging was probably more the whole thing, messaging, strategic narrative, like all the things were kind of more isolated events and really relied upon heavily without additional context. And in today's ecosystem, especially with like PLG being very high, or even if you're not PLG, having some sort of demo, whether it be a video demo or like, an actual walkthrough on your site, like everything is so product focused that I think the buyers really expect both, and they have to match, right? There has to be the intersection between the brand, like how you feel about things across every touch point, even outside of the website or the product, like someone on LinkedIn talking about something, whatever it may be, like brand and positioning across that ecosystem, messaging that's consistent and resonant throughout everything. And also having the product speak to and like complement what the messaging is saying as an additional proof point really matter. And to your point, like if you have a bad experience with the product, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good your messaging is. And likewise, if your messaging is the best messaging that there is on the planet and your product doesn't like what it needs to be, like both need to work in this like synergistic way, especially today is what I found.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to end and wrap up. Making sure, I mean, it sounds so simple. The right hand's talking to the left hand in the terms of your product, your customer experience, your messaging, your marketing, your sales, is, to your point, all rowing in the same direction. And my pet peeve that I will leave with, and I'll let you have yours, is please don't do your messaging with LLMs. It is a great brainstorming activity. It is going to be helpful. It can help you stress test. It can help you compare and contrast. LLMs are built on a set of data, synthetic or not, that has already been put out in the world. You are not going to come out with anything revolutionary, original, or truly all-inspiring coming out of an LLM.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're telling me, Sheena, that's okay. My team doesn't need that. That's fine. But then I don't think, you should expect outsized returns or results as well then. I really think at the end of the day, nothing replaces understanding your buyer, understanding their pain points, understanding their use cases, and then helping to articulate your value in their language.
Yes. Plus 1,000 pluses to that. Yes. Do not use LLMs isolated, and make sure you have someone who is well versed in this area of expertise to drive home something that's going to be unique, differentiated, not using the word supercharge and revolutionize in every single sentence you go to say. Please, please, please. If that's the one takeaway, I think that would be an awesome takeaway.
Totally. Well, Madison, thank you for doing our first episode of our 2025 commitments for Big C creativity. We covered a lot of fun stuff around consulting, around goals, around obviously go to market, strategic narrative, positioning, messaging, all that fun stuff. So I have to do it. Like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what's top of mind for you guys. And we look forward to being out in front of you guys more.
Yay. So excited. Thanks.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye.